The Hippocratic Oath is an oath historically taken by physicians. It is one of the most widely known of Greek medical texts. In its original form, it requires a new physician to swear, by a number of healing gods, to uphold specific ethical standards of historic and traditional value. The oath is considered a rite of passage for practitioners of medicine in many countries, although nowadays various modernized versions are often used. Hippocrates is often called the father of medicine in Western culture. The original oath was written in Ionic Greek, in the late 5th century BC. It is usually included in the Hippocratic corpus. Scholars widely believe that Hippocrates or one of his students wrote the oath between the 5th and 3rd century BC. Alternatively, classical scholar Ludwig Edelstein proposed that the oath was written by the Pythagoreans, an idea that others questioned for lack of evidence for a school of Pythagorean medicine. Original oath. This is the original version of the Hippocratic Oath in Greek and then followed by the English translation. Mu nu upsilon mu iota pi omicron lambda lambda omega nu alpha eta tau rho nu kappa alpha sigma kappa lambda eta pi iota nu kappa alpha gamma epsilon iota alpha nu kappa alpha pi alpha nu alpha kappa epsilon iota alpha nu kappa alpha theta epsilon omicron sigma pi alpha nu tau alpha sigma tau epsilon kappa alpha pi alpha sigma sigma tau omicron rho alpha sigma pi omicron iota epsilon upsilon mu epsilon nu omicron sigma pi iota tau epsilon lambda epsilon alpha pi omicron iota eta sigma epsilon iota nu kappa alpha tau delta upsilon nu alpha mu iota nu kappa alpha kappa rho iota sigma iota nu mu nu rho kappa omicron nu tau omicron nu delta epsilon kappa alpha sigma upsilon gamma gamma rho alpha phi nu tau eta nu delta epsilon gamma eta sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota mu nu tau nu delta iota delta alpha chi alpha nu tau alpha mu epsilon tau nu tau epsilon chi nu eta nu tau alpha upsilon tau eta nu sigma alpha gamma epsilon nu epsilon tau sigma iota nu mu omicron sigma kappa alpha beta iota omicron upsilon kappa omicron iota nu omega sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota kappa alpha chi rho epsilon nu chi rho eta iota zeta omicron nu tau iota mu epsilon tau alpha delta omicron sigma iota nu pi omicron iota eta sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota kappa alpha gamma epsilon nu omicron sigma tau chi alpha tau omicron delta epsilon lambda phi omicron sigma sigma omicron nu pi iota kappa rho iota nu epsilon nu rho epsilon sigma iota kappa alpha delta iota delta alpha chi epsilon iota nu tau epsilon chi nu eta nu tau alpha upsilon tau eta nu chi rho eta iota zeta omega sigma iota mu alpha nu theta alpha nu epsilon iota nu epsilon upsilon mu iota sigma theta omicron kappa alpha sigma upsilon gamma gamma rho alpha phi sigma pi alpha rho alpha gamma gamma epsilon lambda iota eta sigma tau epsilon kappa alpha kappa rho omicron eta sigma iota omicron sigma kappa alpha tau sigma lambda omicron iota pi eta sigma pi alpha sigma eta sigma mu alpha theta eta sigma iota omicron sigma mu epsilon tau alpha delta omicron sigma iota nu pi omicron iota eta sigma epsilon sigma theta alpha iota upsilon omicron sigma tau epsilon mu omicron sigma kappa alpha tau omicron sigma tau omicron mu delta iota delta alpha chi alpha nu tau omicron sigma kappa alpha mu alpha theta eta tau sigma iota sigma upsilon gamma gamma epsilon gamma rho alpha alpha mu mu epsilon nu omicron iota of sigma tau epsilon kappa alpha rho kappa iota of sigma mu epsilon nu omicron iota of sigma nu omicron mu eta tau rho iota kappa lambda lambda delta omicron delta epsilon nu iota delta iota alpha iota tau eta mu alpha sigma iota tau epsilon chi rho eta sigma omicron mu alpha iota pi phi epsilon lambda epsilon iota kappa alpha mu nu omicron nu tau omega nu kappa alpha tau delta epsilon nu alpha mu iota nu kappa alpha kappa rho iota of sigma iota nu mu eta news pi delta eta lambda eta sigma epsilon iota delta kappa alpha delta iota kappa iota epsilon rho she epsilon iota nu omicron delta omega sigma omega delta omicron delta phi alpha rho mu alpha kappa omicron nu omicron delta epsilon nu alpha tau eta theta epsilon sigma theta alpha nu alpha sigma iota mu omicron nu omicron delta phi eta gamma 8 the sigma omicron mu alpha iota of sigma epsilon mu beta omicron epsilon lambda iota eta nu tau omicron iota eta nu delta epsilon mu omicron iota omega sigma delta omicron delta gamma epsilon nu alpha iota kappa pi epsilon sigma sigma nu phi theta omicron rho iota omicron nu delta omega sigma omega gamma nu sigma delta kappa alpha sigma iota omega sigma delta iota alpha tau eta rho eta sigma omega beta iota omicron nu tau nu mu nu kappa alpha tau epsilon chi nu eta nu tau nu mu eta nu omicron tau epsilon mu epsilon omega delta omicron delta mu nu lambda iota theta iota nu tau alpha sigma kappa chi omega rho eta sigma omega delta rho gamma alpha tau sigma iota nu delta rho alpha sigma iota pi rho eta she iota omicron sigma tau sigma delta epsilon sigma omicron kappa iota alpha sigma delta kappa omicron sigma alpha sigma nu sigma iota omega sigma epsilon lambda epsilon epsilon sigma omicron mu alpha iota pi phi epsilon lambda epsilon iota kappa alpha mu nu omicron nu tau omega news kappa tau sigma nu pi alpha sigma eta sigma delta iota kappa iota eta sigma kappa omicron epsilon sigma iota eta sigma kappa alpha phi theta omicron rho iota eta sigma tau epsilon lambda lambda eta sigma kappa alpha phi rho omicron delta iota of sigma iota omega nu rho gamma omega nu pi iota tau epsilon gamma epsilon nu alpha iota kappa epsilon iota omega nu sigma omega mu alpha tau omega nu kappa alpha nu delta rho omega news lambda epsilon theta epsilon rho omega nu tau epsilon kappa alpha delta omicron epsilon lambda omega nu delta nu theta epsilon rho alpha pi epsilon iota delta omega kappa omicron epsilon sigma omega kappa alpha nu epsilon theta epsilon rho alpha pi epsilon iota eta sigma kappa alpha tau beta iota omicron nu theta rho omega pi omega news mu pi rho eta pi omicron tau epsilon kappa lambda epsilon sigma theta alpha iota she omega sigma iota gamma 8 the sigma omicron mu alpha iota rho eta tau alpha gamma epsilon mu epsilon nu omicron sigma epsilon nu alpha iota tau omicron iota alpha tau alpha rho kappa omicron nu mu omicron nu mu omicron iota tau omicron nu delta epsilon pi iota tau epsilon lambda epsilon alpha pi omicron iota epsilon omicron nu tau iota kappa alpha mu sigma epsilon gamma chi epsilon omicron nu tau iota epsilon eta pi alpha epsilon rho alpha sigma theta alpha iota kappa alpha beta iota omicron upsilon kappa alpha tau epsilon chi nu eta sigma delta omicron chi alpha zeta omicron mu epsilon nu pi alpha rho pi sigma iota nu theta rho omega pi omicron iota sigma sigma tau nu alpha epsilon chi rho omicron nu pi alpha rho alpha beta alpha iota nu omicron nu tau iota delta kappa alpha pi iota omicron rho kappa epsilon omicron nu tau iota tau nu alpha nu tau iota alpha tau omicron upsilon tau omega nu. I swear by Apollo the healer, by Asclepius, by Hygeia, by Panacea, and by all the gods and goddesses, making them my witnesses, that I will carry out, according to my ability and judgment, this oath and this indenture, to hold my teacher in this art equal to my own parents, to make him partner in my livelihood when he is in need of money, to share mine with him, to consider his family as my own brothers, and to teach them this art, if they want to learn it, without fee or indenture, to impart precept, oral instruction, and all other instruction to my own sons, the sons of my teacher, and to indentured pupils who have taken the physician's oath, but to nobody else. I will use treatment to help the sick according to my ability and judgment, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. Similarly, I will not give to a woman a pessary to cause abortion, but I will keep pure and holy both my life and my art. I will not use the knife, not even, verily, on sufferers from stone, but I will give place to such as are craftsmen therein. Into whatsoever houses I enter, I will enter to help the sick, and I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm, especially from abusing the bodies of man or woman, bond or free. And whatsoever I shall see or hear in the course of my profession, as well as outside my profession in my intercourse with men, if it be what should not be published abroad, I will never divulge, holding such things to be holy secrets. Now if I carry out this oath, and break it not, may I gain forever reputation among all men for my life and for my art, but if I transgress it and forswear myself, may the opposite befall me. Modern version. I swear to fulfill, to the best of my ability and judgment, this covenant. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk, and gladly share such knowledge as is mine with those who are to follow. I will apply, for the benefit of the sick, all measures which are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. I will not be ashamed to say, I know not, nor will I fail to call in my colleagues when the skills of another are needed for a patient's recovery. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for the problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. Above all, I must not play at God. I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being, whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems. If I'm to care adequately for the sick, I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. I will remember that I remain a member of society, with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body as well as the infirm. If I do not violate this oath, may I enjoy life and art, respected while I live and remembered with affection thereafter. May I always act so as to preserve the finest traditions of my calling, and may I long experience the joy of healing those who seek my help. Written in 1964 by Louis Lasagna, Academic Dean of the School of Medicine at Tufts Tufts University, and used in many medical schools today. First, do no harm. It is a popular misconception that the phrase, first do no harm, is a part of the Hippocratic Oath. Strictly speaking, the phrase does not appear in the oath, although the oath does contain, also I will, according to my ability and judgment, prescribe a regimen for the health of the sick, but I will utterly reject harm and mischief. In Latin, victus quoque rationem ad agro tantrum salutem pro facultate judicio meo ad abebo noxum vero e maleficium propulsabo. Another equivalent phrase is found in Epidemics, Book 1, of the Hippocratic School. Practice two things in your dealings with disease. Either help or do not harm the patient. The exact phrase is believed to have originated with the 19th century surgeon Thomas Inman. Modern use and relevance. The oath has been modified numerous times. One of the most significant revisions was first drafted in 1948 by the World Medical Association, called the Declaration of Geneva. During the post-World War II and immediately after its foundation, the WMA showed concern over the state of medical ethics in general and over the world. The WMA took up the responsibility for setting ethical guidelines for the world's physicians. It noted that in those years the custom of medical schools to administer an oath to its doctors upon graduation or receiving a license to practice medicine had fallen into disuse or become a mere formality. In Germany during the Third Reich, medical students did not take the Hippocratic Oath, although they knew the ethic of nil nocere, do no harm. In the 1960s, the Hippocratic Oath was changed to require utmost respect for human life from its beginning, making it a more secular obligation, not to be taken in the presence of God or any gods, but before any other people. When the oath was rewritten in 1964 by Louis Lasagna, academic dean of the School of Medicine at Tufts University, the prayer was omitted, and that version has been widely accepted and is still in use today by many U.S. medical schools. In the United States, the majority of osteopathic medical schools use the osteopathic oath in place of or in addition to the Hippocratic Oath. The osteopathic oath was first used in 1938, and the current version has been in use since 1954. In a 1989 survey of 126 U.S. medical schools, only 3 reported use of the original oath, while 33 used the Declaration of Geneva, 67 used a modified Hippocratic Oath, 4 used the Oath of Maimonides, 1 used a covenant, 8 used another oath, 1 used an unknown oath, and 2 did not use any kind of oath. 7 medical schools did not reply to the survey. In a 2000 survey of U.S. medical schools, all of the then extant medical schools administered some type of profession oath. Among schools of modern medicine, 62 of 122 used the Hippocratic Oath, or a modified version of it. The other 60 schools used the original or modified Declaration of Geneva, Oath of Maimonides, or an oath authored by students and a faculty. All 19 osteopathic schools used the osteopathic oath. In France, it is common for new medical graduates to sign a written oath. In 1995, Sir Joseph Rotblat, in his acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize, suggested a Hippocratic Oath for scientists. Abortion and the Hippocratic Oath. While many Christian versions of the Hippocratic Oath, particularly from the Middle Ages, explicitly prohibited abortion, the prohibition is often omitted from many oaths taken in U.S. medical schools today, though it remains controversial. Scribonius Largi was adamant in 43 AD that it preclude abortion. As with Scribonius Largus, there seemed to be no question to Soranus that the Hippocratic Oath prohibits abortion, although apparently not all doctors adhered to it strictly in his time. According to Soranus's 1st or 2nd century AD work Gynecology, one party of medical practitioners banished all abortives as required by the Hippocratic Oath. The other party, to which he belonged, was willing to prescribe abortions, but only for the sake of the mother's health. Euthanasia and the Hippocratic Oath. The original oath forbids the physician from administering poison or suggesting its administration. This would forbid the physician from engaging in euthanasia and, all the more so, any role in physician-assisted suicide. Lethal injection and the Hippocratic Oath. There has been a large debate on whether doctors administering or facilitating lethal injections to prisoners are breaking the Hippocratic Oath they took. In 1991, Joe Sahi was set to be executed in Georgia, United States. The execution team could not gain access to Joe Sahi's vein due to extreme drug use from his past. The execution team brought in a doctor who had critical care training and was an expert at finding deep veins in the human body. Once the doctor was hired for the sole reason of inserting an IV, the doctor at that point became part of the execution team. Up until this point, doctors would not take part in placing an IV or administering the drugs, but were only there to pronounce the death of the inmate. The execution happened without incident. However, a group of doctors sued the Georgia State Medical Board for not disciplining the doctor, stating that he violated federal law and broke the Hippocratic Oath. In response, the Georgia legislature passed laws protecting doctors who take part in lethal injections from civil and criminal prosecution. Breaking the Hippocratic Oath. There is no direct punishment for breaking the Hippocratic Oath in modern times. It can be said that malpractice is the same thing, and it carries a wide range of punishments, from legal action to civil penalties. In the U.S., several major judicial decisions have made reference back to the classical Hippocratic Oath, either upholding or dismissing its bounds for medical ethics. Roe v. Wade, Washington v. Harper, Compassion in Dying v. State of Washington, and Thorburn v. Department of Corrections. In antiquity, the punishment for breaking the Hippocratic Oath could range from a penalty to losing the right to practice medicine.